Welcome, persisters and brothers. I am so honored to have Chad Peevy with me today. I'm going to introduce him in just a second, but Chad gave a great pitch, and he just reminded me of how much we all need to be embraced, included, and celebrated in life. Chad Peevy is an amazing man who was raised in a fundamentalist Christian home and had to come to grips with the fact that he was gay in a place in Arkansas where that was simply not acceptable. And I just think, what would that be like? It's hard enough to be a kid growing up, much less have to deal with that. So I hearken back to my days, 20 years as a juvenile probation supervisor. Every single year we were faced with parents who wanted us to force their kids not to be gay as part of their court orders for crimes they may have committed. They wanted us to somehow drum that out of them. And when I'd go to the runaway shelter as part of my job where teenagers were, they were often filled, the runaway and homeless shelter for teens was filled with a lot of times gay children who'd been rejected by their families. This is something that is absolutely crushing, absolutely devastating. And when one of us is hurting, we are all hurting. So I'm excited to hear what positive things Chad has done with his experience to help people understand, embrace, and celebrate all of us as children and as grown children, and have a conversation about forgiveness and resilience. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
And like I said, here is Chad Peevy. Chad, welcome to Persistence U, and thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be with you.
Can you tell us a little bit more about a couple of things that you've been working on recently before you tell us how you got to start doing the work that you do?
Yeah, in my past life, I was a band director. I went to school at the University of Arkansas and the University of Texas, and I have 2 degrees in music education. And so I was a band director for half a minute and thought that that was going to be my path. I actually really loved the work, but decided that I wanted to do other things. And then I started the in-house marketing firm for Keller Williams, which is the largest real estate company in the world. And then that morphed into online training and creating online training for their agents. And I did that for them around the world. And along the way, I started a couple of nonprofits. My husband and I have a nonprofit called the PS Foundation for the Arts, which allows me to have that music connection still. We host a summer music camp for orchestra kids in Austin every year. And I started the Austin Pride Foundation. And so I try to stay as busy as possible, and keep myself out of trouble.
I love it. You're doing some great things. So tell us a little bit more about your backstory, though. Growing up in Arkansas, I did mention a little bit in the intro, but tell us a little bit more about your growing up experience and how it shaped you wanting to do the work you do today.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I really love the name of your podcast. And I was thinking about how does that apply to me? And I was thinking about that and thinking that if I were asked to theme my life, persistence would be a word that I couldn't leave out of that theme. And, growing up a gay kid in Arkansas, it's not exactly gay Mecca. It's not, I didn't have any, role models. I didn't meet my first openly gay person until I went to college. And so I was 18 before I ever actually met an openly gay man. And so I was growing up feeling very different, very other, trying really hard to fit in at school, fit in at home, and trying to navigate my way through life. And along the way, I developed these survival mindsets and survival defense mechanisms that helped me do that. But that was my experience growing up. It wasn't easy. I had my mom was really young when she had me, and I would say I refer to her in my book as ill-equipped. That was the nicest way I could say what I experienced. My dad was a bully. I mean, he was a bully in school. He had a reputation for being a bully. And then there's me, this sensitive little gay boy. And we were just oil and water. But the power dynamics, of course, were certainly in his favor. And so growing up for me was not easy, not an easy go.
Did you have siblings?
I have a younger brother. He is 7 years younger than I am. And I think when you're that far apart, it's almost like being only children a little bit. We weren't super close growing up as kids. And he's a lot like my dad. And so that has, it's sometimes hard for me. That relationship is sometimes hard for me because he does remind me so much of my dad.
Okay.
But yeah, but he's living his life. He's living a great life. He has two amazing kids and a very smart and sophisticated wife. And so they're very happy.
Good. What was it like when you're growing up feeling other and feeling like you have to pretend you're someone different? Did you ever want to talk to your parents about who you really were?
No.
Okay.
No. And I didn't come out until I was 22.
Okay.
And so I was putting that off just as long as I possibly could.
All right.
It was dangerous. It would have been dangerous for me, physically dangerous to come out as a kid.
Okay.
So that was not a possibility. I grew up in a fundamentalist religious upbringing. And so I had the weight of hell was waiting for me, basically, is how I was looking at life through that lens. And so to talk to them about it would have been dangerous.
Okay. And then when you did finally open up, or at least when your parents learned about you being gay, how was that initially?
So I got to a point. I was at university. I was doing my music ed degree at the U of A, and I started seeing guys at that point. I started dating other guys, and I kept that a secret. And of course, I experienced what so many other gay people experience, where mother is asking, "Have you met any nice girls?
Right.
You know, is there anybody in your life?" And I'm going, "Oh," figuring out every which way to lie about it without lying about it.
Right.
And so that was going on. And then it just got to a point where there was just so much internal turmoil, and I was just ripping myself up inside, that it just wasn't bearable anymore. And I went home and I sat them down in the living room, and I started telling them, there's something I need to tell you. I'm gay.
Mhm.
And my dad didn't say a whole lot. I think that they had always suspected. There was a moment when I was in ninth grade. I can remember being in bed. My dad would go to work really early in the morning, and he and my mom were having a heated argument at really early in the morning, and it woke me up. And I can remember my mom saying, "I just wish that you would spend more time with him," basically talking about me. And my dad says, "Well, he just acts like a little faggot."
Oh.
And I remember that so vividly, Elizabeth, as if it was last night. And so I think that he suspected, if not knew.
Okay.
I think my mom knew. So I tell them, my mom starts crying and had a really hard time with it. One of the first things that my mom said to me is, "Who's going to take care of you when you get AIDS?" That was sort of her response. That was her response. And the one thing that I regret about my coming out, I talk in my book about the consequences of our courage. And it's one thing to have courage and to come out and be you and all of that, but it's also there are real life consequences when you demonstrate real life courage in your life. And one of the things that I wish I'd done differently when I came out was I wish that I had been so much more declaratively definitive that this is who I am. I made the mistake of saying that I wished that I wasn't gay.
Okay.
that I hoped that I could be different, that I could change. I gave them a glimmer of hope,
Okay.
and that was a mistake. Not long after I came out, I was living in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where the university is. And I can remember my mom knocking on my door in the middle of the night, and she had a bunch of Exodus pamphlets, which is this conversion type therapy
Okay.
program.
And for those who
And
don't understand that, could I just interject real quickly that the
yeah, please.
conversion type of therapies you're talking about are programs that are often church-based, but not always, I suspect, that are trying to get gay children not to be gay. They're trying to
Mhm.
fix them in a sense by doing various techniques, which have been found to be very, very harmful by the psychological associations.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I'm glad that you did. And so that was, if I could say there was a regret about coming out, it was that I was not more firm. I
Okay.
wish that I had asked for more help. I wish that I had reached out to organizations that were available to me at the university. I wish that I had sought out mentors that could have helped me through that process.
Okay.
And helped me navigate that conversation with my parents better. But I mean, I was a 22-year-old kid. I didn't know what I was doing.
That's okay. And what was it like when your mom did that? Did you understand that that was probably also rooted in love, or were you just so frustrated?
I at the time I was really, really frustrated,
Sure.
and
Okay.
it has taken me a really long time to overcome that. And it's clearly something that had an impression. I'm talking about it with you. It's something that I
Sure.
still talk about in therapy, because that talk about a moment of vulnerability in your life when you're having this conversation with these people that brought you into the world, and all of a sudden you come in and you basically blow up every fantasy they've ever had for you, which says something about them, and you're just blowing it all to pieces. And that moment of vulnerability and that moment of impression, the words that are used in that moment are really important,
Oh,
and they stick. It is one of those life-defining disruptive moments that, it's like um, before Christ and after Christ. Like it's a demarcation in our life
it
that when
bisects your
that
life.
thing happened.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah,
There was life before you came out and life after, and there was that
exactly.
moment of how it went. And I would bet 99% of the time it does go very well. A lot of times, I should just say, I bet it goes very poorly. You weren't alone in that. How
Yeah.
very, very difficult. So there was that happened. And then what was your relationship like afterward?
I needed space. And
Okay.
I definitely took periods in my life where I would go months, if not years, without having a real relationship with my parents. And we would try. So we would make a little bit of effort. At least my mom and we would make a little bit of effort, and then we would need to take a break, and we would make a little effort, and we would need to take a break. And with my dad, that was very, very different. He was who he was, and I never really had a willing dance partner in the relationship. So and I haven't spoken to my dad in almost 15 years, and he and my mom divorced a few years, I think 5 to 8 years actually after I came out. They divorced. And my mom and I work on our relationship all the time. She makes effort in our relationship. She makes effort with my husband. I relate it to dancing because sometimes we step on one another's toes. Sometimes it's awkward. Sometimes it's messy, but we keep dancing. And as long as we're each willing to keep dancing, I'm willing to put in the work and the effort with her. With my dad, I mean, you can't dance with someone that's not willing to groove. So I just, that has not worked out.
I think that is such a great way to put it. And that's true for all kinds of family relationships. If there's willingness to keep dancing, even when you smash each other's toes once in a while, as long as that smashing isn't intentional chronically,
Yeah.
that's amazing. That's just fantastic. So today, how is it that you're helping other young men and women who are in the shoes you used to walk in?
So I started seeing the school counselor when I was in 4th grade, and ever since then, I've been mostly in therapy in some way. And along my journey, I've done a whole lot of writing and journaling and tracking what it was that I was going through and experiencing and what I was working through. And I got to a point in my career where I was doing work that I mentioned earlier, and it was filling the bank account, but it wasn't filling the soul. And I knew I wanted to do something different. And I wanted to have more of an impact, and I wanted to have more influence, and I wanted to help other people who had been through what I had been through. And so I started collecting my journal and my experiences and putting them into words and wrote the book, Break Untangle. And that's one way that I'm doing that. I do a lot of corporate speaking to LGBTQIA groups, which are these employee resource groups where if you're in a corporation, you can be part of this group of other people like you. And I'll go in and talk to those groups. And I do coaching and online courses. So that's how that's become manifest. Mm-hmm.
When you think about the little boy that you were back before you came out, what would you want him to know today? If you could reach back and just talk to him and let him know that things would be okay. It's a hard one, and you don't have to. Yeah.
Yeah. I like to think about these before I throw something out.
Sure.
Because I have done a lot of work with the younger self. And I think one of the things that we forget is that 7-year-old little kid, the 5-year-old me that realized in kindergarten that he was different, that didn't have the word gay in his vocabulary, but knew he wasn't like the other kids in school. And the middle school kid that was picked on and called names that he didn't understand. And to have my dad say that about me, that little boy still lives inside of me. That little boy is still here. And so I feel like I'm always having a conversation with that internal child, because there's so much. The world is not made for people like me. I mean, let's just face it. This is a straight oriented world. And so I'm always having this conversation about who I am and how I can show up and how I can be me. And Elizabeth, not doing that in a way that being gay gets to define my life, gets to define my career, gets to define the work that I do. But how can I live a fully human life? And gay is just one part of it. So I'm always talking to that kid inside of me and having that conversation, letting him know that he's okay, that he's safe, that not only is the little kid living inside of me, but also the one that is extremely resilient, that is extremely resourceful, that is extremely persistent, and letting the little kid know that the adult version of me, the man that I have become, is here to protect that little kid still living inside of me. So it sounds a little crazy, like I have voices in my head, but that's how I navigate my life. Like I let the voices talk. I let the voices have the conversations with different parts of myself to operate in the world with less fear, to operate with more persistence, to operate with more resilience, to operate with more love, and give that little kid, that little version of me, the things that I can give him now that he wasn't given as a kid.
I love it. I just think that is so amazing. And for everyone to know that they're not alone in their situation, if they're feeling like they're living in a place or in a family or whatever, that they're still not alone. There's a community out there for them, and that there is love and there will be acceptance, and it may just not be at this very moment, but to keep moving forward. And I love that you're bringing this conversation to light. What would you say to parents? Because I also have compassion for parents who are very ill-equipped. I think most parents are ill-equipped for all parenting, not just if their kid is gay, straight, what has mental health issues, whatever. I think that we're all somewhat ill-equipped and we mess it up. And so for parents who have made that moment where their child came out a terrible a terrible blight in that child's life. And I'm not saying to excuse that, but how, if they love their child and are committed, how would you want a conversation to look like to inspire hope for change?
To talk about that, I have to talk about suffering.
Okay.
And the way that I think about suffering is it's the state that we experience when life doesn't meet our expectations. I think that my life is going to go this way. I think my kids' life is going to go this way. And because they're going to be this way, that means something for who I'm going to be.
Right.
And when, like I said, when I came out to my mom and dad, they had a fantasy for having a daughter-in-law and grandkids and all the things that would go along with this prescription that a straight Chad would have lived out. And I think for parents, the thing to consider for me would be that your children have to live their life. They have to have their journey. And we get a choice when it comes to our suffering. We can suffer from our expectations. We can suffer from the pain of them not living who we hoped they would be, or we can suffer toward helping them create the very best life possible for them, one that is truly theirs, that they get to create and find love and joy and passion and beauty in who they are. So when you're thinking about having this conversation, I bring it back to that. Do you want to suffer from the pain and agony of what you could have been, or do you want to suffer toward creating a beautiful life for this person? And that's how I would just interject that into that conversation. Make a choice. Do you want to suffer from, or do you want to suffer toward?
Love
You're
it.
going to suffer either way. So pick.
Right. And I do think, like you said, so much of it comes from expectations. And if I could just say, in theory, what we read in parenting books is that we have to be involved in every part of our little bitty baby's life to make sure they drink the right milk, eat the right foods, later on have the right friends, sports, education, all of that. So you have to have expectation to be a parent. The problem is it goes so far that we want our kids to be reflections of us. And that's just not how that is. That's not how it works. And that's always going to lead to disaster. It's really going to lead to disaster, whether you have a compliant child that wants to fulfill that expectation or you don't. It just doesn't serve anyone well.
Yeah. And that compliant child, I was a very compliant child. I was a very good little boy. Eventually, that child yearns for their own personal freedom, yearns for their own authentic life. They start asking, who am I, absent these inherited mindsets that I've picked up? And I think that has a major influence on the relationships we have with our parents as we get older. Are they people who are willing to let me have my life, or are they people who still expect and use guilt and shame to get me to conform and turn me back into the little kid that I was growing up when that kid is not here?
Right. I like that very much. Well, so what are you working on next, and where can our listeners connect with you and your work?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I would like to give all of your listeners a copy of my book. They can get a free copy of my book on my website, chadpeevy.com.
Okay.
It's right there on the homepage. And there's a course that goes along with that. And I work all the time to make that better. So that's how folks can find me and connect with me. Thank you, Chad. Thank you so much for this. And I hope I didn't throw too many curved questions in as we were talking. Things just came to mind, but I'm love this conversation. Thank you for it. Yeah. Thanks for the work that you're doing. And by the way, you've moved to you're not in Arkansas any longer. So business has moved. That's fantastic. That's right. I'm very glad things have turned out beautifully for you. So keep in touch and thanks so much. Thank you.